I'll be presenting to you our study that looked at assessing the feasibility of applying the welfare quality assessment protocol for dairy cows among dairy farms in Kiruhura district in Western Uganda. So the welfare quality assessment protocol for dairy cows is among the many protocols that were developed under an EU-funded project, the Welfare Quality Project, where they came up with welfare assessment tools that can be used on farms to assess the status of welfare for the animals kept in those different farms. So we noticed through our literature searches that this protocol was developed mainly for farms set up in Europe and areas with similar keeping conditions for animals. However, for other areas, for example, here in Uganda, where the study was done, or other parts in Africa, we have different keeping conditions for animals. So it was necessary for us to adapt the welfare assessment protocol that was developed for European farms to now the pasture-based systems that exist in Uganda and other areas in Africa. So that was the background for us to carry out this research. So what we did, we tested how the applicability, how this protocol could be applied among the dairy farms in the Kiruhura district. So the objective of the study, just to echo this again, was to assess the feasibility and practicability of using the welfare quality assessment protocol for dairy cows on extensive dairy farms in Kiruhura district. And this was carried out during milking and also during grazing, when the animals are taken out to graze in the paddocks. And the hypothesis here, we wanted to test the protocol to see which measures would be used as they are, those that required to be modified in order to be used, and those that would be eliminated from the protocol. Now the study design, this was a cross-sectional study. We went in from the end of December last year up to January this year. So we went to Kiruhura, which is a district in the western region of Uganda, with a population of about 300,000 people, and the cattle estimated at around 270,000. And the livestock farming is the main economic activity in this district. So more details about the area, about the district, can be obtained from that link. So in red here on the map of Uganda is where Kiruhura district is located. So in the data collection, the protocol was tested on 24 dairy farms, and their herd sizes ranged from 15, some farms had 15, and the largest had 125 cows in the months, as I have mentioned earlier, from December 2020 to January 2021. So within Kiruhura, Kiruhura has up to 12 sub-counties. So we did the testing in 6 sub-counties within the districts. And this was carried out over 2 visits per farm. So the first visit, as you can see in the pictures here, was early in the morning. We would usually set off at around 5:30, and that corresponded with the time of milking. So we would go and interact with the herdsman, and sometimes you would find the owner of the farm also there. So there we did a questionnaire guided interview with the herdsman or the owner of the farm, and we were evaluating aspects of care, aspects of management, health of the animals, and also assessing the welfare attributes of the cows when they were within these what we call the barn. so waiting to be milked. So we would assess the body condition score, how are the animals looking, we would see the respiration, any vocalization, then we would record those within the cow barn in the first visit. Then we had a second visit that was done in the afternoon. That corresponded to the time when the animals are grazing out there in the paddocks. For those farms that had paddocks, but some did not have paddocks, they were just grazing over a very large piece of land. So there, when we went in, we were assessing the farm resources, things to do with availability of water, the pastures that are there, looking at how the environment, the suitability of the environment. We also looked at stockmanship. How are these people handling the herdsmen? How do they interact with the animals? And overall, 1,256 cows were assessed and the 24 farm managers were interviewed. And just to note, each of these assessments took us about 1 hour maximum. And in the analysis of the data, this is similar to what has been done in other studies that also looked at the same. We categorized these measures. When we applied them on the farms, we categorized them into those measures that are feasible to use on our farms in Kirora district as they are, and then those that required some modification, and also we had those that had to be eliminated. So in the results, I'll start with the feasible measures, the measures that were feasible and could be used as they were, as they exist in the welfare quality protocol that was developed in Europe. So the principle, looking at good feeding, criteria, absence of hunger, and the measures that we looked at were body condition score, rumen field score, and we were able to assess the percentage of thin or lean cows in the herd, the percentage of cows with hollow or empty rumens. These were visible and we could assess these on the farms. Then under appropriate environment, we were looking at thermal comfort and the measure being the shade, amount of shade. It was possible to assess subjectively the amount of shade that was available by looking at the presence of trees or any built structures for the animals. Udder dirtiness, we were also able to assess that by looking at the udder of the cows when they were in the cow barn. Then hazards that existed within the grazing areas. So this was possible to measure. It was possible to see the cliffs, the gullies, the sinkholes, or any other dangerous objects. So it was possible to assess. A continuation of these feasible measures under good health, looking at hampered respiration or coughing. When the cows were within the barn prior to milking, we were able to measure the number of coughs or hampered respiration. Broken tails, was able to see lameness as they walked. This was only actually possible within the cow barn. So it was not possible when they were grazing because of the longer pastures, as I will explain later. Then mortality, we were able to obtain this information through the guided interviews with the herdsman or the owner of the farm. Then diarrhea, by looking at the wet or dry patches of feces below the tail head. So we were able to see that. Absence of pain from management procedures. So this was from questions with the herdsman or the owner was possible. Nasal discharges, also possible to observe. Abrasion, swelling, and hair loss. These were possible to be observed. So these were feasible measures. A continuation of still the measures that were feasible that we could assess without requiring any changes. Under stockmanship, we have vocalization. So it was possible to record which cows were making those audible sounds during this training. Health checks by using the questionnaire. Flight distance, approaching the cows when they were grazing. Heating of cows, it was possible to see this during herding. And also this is the same as the above. Now, the second result was about measures that required modification for them to be included within the protocol for assessing welfare of animals in our production systems. So under good feeding, the measure is absence of prolonged fast. So in the protocol, it required to measure how far cattle must walk to access water, or how clean at the water points. So the reason for difficulty, most of these farms were very large, and some of them, we found that the water points were being shared among the different farms. So here we only made the recommendation that this needs to be, there is need to look at whether a farm has a watering point, or they have a designated time for watering. So we realized for most of the farms, they would have probably 4 p.m. This is a designated time for watering. So as long as they have that, then we'll be able to make that recording. Then under good health, hoof problems, the protocol requires us to measure presence of overgrown, abnormally shaped or cracked hooves. So the reason for difficulty was for majority of the farms were not maintained and they had overgrown grasses. So the recommendation here is that this needs to be measured in areas where the grasses are short, or in the dry, bare grounds. So you identify this on the farm, and then animals are sent there, and you could make the measurement from there. Then also disease history required modification. The protocol requires that you measure the occurrence of minor or major diseases, or those of variable significance to welfare. The reason for difficulty that we had was that there were, on majority of the farms, there were no records, and sometimes there was no competent person to give you this information. So the recommendation here we made was that this information can be obtained from the disease records, or information at the level of a sub-county, or the local vet that visits that farm, because they usually have this information, or the paravets in the area. A continuation of the measures that required modification and appropriate environment, looking at ease of movement. So the protocol requires measurement of collisions of any part of the cow's body occurring when or during lying down with housing equipment. So the reason for difficulty, these cows spend most of their time in the paddocks, and there are no specific housing structures on the majority of these farms. So it was not possible to measure it as this. So the recommendation here was that there is need to instead measure subjectively measure the presence of thick bushes within the paddock. So for those that maintain their pasture fields, then they would have a better score. And those that do not maintain would have thick bushes that would affect movement of the animals during grazing. Another measure under appropriate environment was miscatch. The protocol says looking at percentage of cattle miscaught in the head or crash. So the reason for difficulty, the crashes or these head gates were not common, were not actually used, and on majority of these farms, they were not there. So the recommendation here was that this needs to be changed to the percentage of cows that are miscaught by the ropes, because this is what is used on majority of the farms during milking or during any form of restraint. Then for appropriate behavior, the measure requires expression of social behaviors. In the protocol, it required that in order to assess this, video records of agonistic or antagonistic behaviors would be used. So the reason for difficulty was no recordings that were existent on the farms, and also the very large grazing spaces, whereby on some of these farms, you find that animals move more than 4 kilometers when they are grazing. So what we recommended here was that the recording could be done on site we said that it is best to record during milking when the cows are within the cow barn. So because they are a bit confined, the area they are within is not very big, and you can easily record this. Then in the third result was about measures that required to be removed from the protocol that were not applicable for in these dairy production systems in Chiruhura. So the majority of them were under stockmanship, and this included bulking, running and stumbling, falls. So the reason here being that none of these were observed on majority of the farms, and mainly because these animals move in very large spaces in these production systems. So, and also we thought that for these, it perhaps required for them to be measured under a different farm activity. So perhaps during milking and grazing, it was not suitable to measure, to make these assessments. So overall, these are the measures that we came up with. So under good feeding, we adopted body condition score, assessing of absence of prolonged thirst, rumen full score. Then under appropriate environment, we came up with, we adopted thermal comfort, assessing thermal comfort, looking at shape, other dirtiness, hazards, ease of movement. Then under good health, these are the measures that we adopted: hampered respiration, broken tails, lameness, the discharges, swellings. And under appropriate stockmanship, we adopted the following measures, including vocalization, heating cows, herding cattle using spaceful approaches. So these were the measures that we came up with that were practical and could be adopted from the welfare quality protocol. So just overall, 30 measures were tested, 3 were excluded due to the reasons I've given earlier, and 6 of them were modified to give the measures that we got above. So in conclusion, it is important to note that not all measures that exist in the welfare quality protocols that were developed in Europe are feasible to be used in assessment of welfare of animals in extensive dairy farms in Chiruhura. And this applies to also other regions that are using pasture-based production systems. So therefore, adaptation of these protocols will be very important in order to make use of these protocols in these production systems, especially in Chiruhura district. And also, as a recommendation, there is a need to establish and set acceptable and non-acceptable standards or threshold for each of these different measures. So, for example, when a measure like such as mortality, what should be the acceptable threshold? So this needs to be done. If we talk about lameness, if we measure lameness, what is the acceptable limit? What is the non-acceptable limit? So these are missing, and this will be important in order to have these measures very applicable, and the farmers can easily use them, or whoever is doing the assessment, or even in the projects that people are running in those communities, so that they can be able to get data and know how different farms are performing. And also, this adaptation needs to be done for also other species. So the welfare quality protocol has the different tools for dairy, it has for pigs, it has for calves. So there is need to adapt all of them for the different species. So I would like to acknowledge the support of WTG, who provided the funding that enabled this research to be carried out. I would like also to thank Kova Makerere University, where I am housed, and the Chiruhura District Local Government for hosting us and accepting us to do this research from there. My contact details are there. So in case of any question or any concern, I'll be happy to respond. So thank you so much for listening. That was the presentation.